And I think we're live. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. And if you're watching this later, thanks for tuning in later. Today, I'm joined by our friends at Webtrends Optimize, Sandeep and James. And I'll let you say a few words about yourself, but we're talking about a topic at coming. Right, I've been back from leave. I was away in the mountains and came back after a month of being in the mountains. And the first day, there was a conversation about personalization. And I've just had another conversation about personalization. And that's pretty much been the theme. I'm interested to hear what you have to say on that. And I'm going to hand it over to you, Sandeep and James. Just before you start, if you have any questions in the audience, and if you're watching this live, please put the questions in the comments. We will get to them throughout the show. So we won't necessarily wait until the end. We'll flight the questions as they come in. Sandeep, floor's yours.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Yeah, if you can pop the screen up, hopefully it's there. Hello everyone. Good afternoon, or whatever time zone you may be watching us in. And yeah, thank you for attending our webinar. So this is a conversation between myself and James. We will introduce ourselves. And the topic is no more best practices BS, looking at defining your personalization strategy for 2024. Two very interesting aspects to that title, I think, looking at best practices probably not being the ideal approach for anyone really, in terms of, hey, just do this. And so focusing more on the strategy, the thinking, the ways to mobilize. So that's what we'll be focusing on today, hopefully taking you through some useful content. To start with, just by introducing ourselves, James, if you want to hop in.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Sandeep. Yeah, good morning, good afternoon. Just a very brief introduction. So I think you've guessed by now, I'm James. I'm currently working with Sandeep at Webtrends Optimize, sort of leading the customer success. I actually had to write this slide the other day and realized I'd spent over 13 years, I think, in this industry now. So kind of getting the hang of things. Previously worked for SessionCam, Glassbox. So kind of experience around, digital experience products. And prior to that was also in A/B testing roles, analytics roles. Worked with a variety of different brands with both Webtrends and with kind of SessionCam, from John Lewis, lots of retailers, Argos, through insurers, and some bigger US customers, United Healthcare, Quicken Loans being a couple. So quite good exposure to a range of different industries. Spent a good amount of time kind of in and around this stuff, but also have the luxury of having Sandeep by my side, who I know is going to introduce himself now as well.
13 years, James. You certainly don't look it. That's a
It's the response I was hoping for. Was that a response I sent you earlier to ask or to tell me?
That's the nicest thing you'll ever hear from me. There we are.
Yeah, it's recorded.
And yeah, hi everyone. So I'm Sandeep, head of product here at Webtrends Optimize, essentially responsible for all things tech that come out of the company, both in terms of defining the product roadmap, building it out, doing a lot of R&D, and then just kind of general consultancy as well. Had the pleasure of being here for just over 11 years now. So kind of one of the, it's not even furniture, I think it's wallpaper at that point, isn't it? But yeah, been around for a long time. Worked with a lot of brands, finance, retail, travel, pretty much everyone that we've had over the years. And yeah, on with the show.
Well, let me cut in there quickly, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So 13 years and 11 years between the three of us, that's like 40, 45, 50 years, quick back of the back calculation. Let me put you on the spot here. James, I'll start with you. How has this game changed in the last 10 years? Sorry, I am putting you on the spot here.
You are, yeah, you are.
Let's go. Yes. But this is why we're here. What would you say, reflecting on 13 years, the last decade, how has CRO changed? What stands out?
So I think Yeah, it's a good question, actually. Yeah, good question. I'm glad you put me on the spot a little bit. So I think all the things that we spoke about 10 years ago are starting to materialize more and more now. So all the things that we were looking at a long time ago are starting to materialize. And in my view of things, the maturity of things takes a little while to become adopted with what we're doing. So I started in a small team. We had kind of ring-fenced resource in an insurance company, and we were looking at improving journeys for people taking insurance, quotes, if you like, trying to find prices for insurance. And no one believed that you could increase the revenue from that journey by improving the experience of it. So we had to kind of prove the value of taking poor experiences and getting people on board across the business to say, if you give us a ring-fenced budget, a small development team, we'll absolutely kind of prove a good return on that investment. And the attitude towards that then was very much, they looked down at us and thought, well, what's the point? You're changing just buttons and words and text and all sorts of things. It's not going to make any difference. And it did. And now that's become the commonplace. So I don't know, it's accelerated quite quickly, but I'm amazed that in some of my conversations that I've had, previously with Session Cam with some customers, even that point can sometimes still be missed. So I think we've come a long way from people accepting that, some of the smaller things that they can change and they can have a bigger impact on what they're trying to achieve very quickly. I think the attitude has changed quite a lot, but I think also the maturity of everything else that we were told we were going to be using in 10 years has all come at once. So it's this kind of frantic energy of trying to understand it and also trying to utilize it all in one go.
James, thanks for that reflection. That's I think we started in CRO more or less the same time. I think I've got a few more grey hairs than you, but I was around.
I just hide them better.
Yeah. But you touched on something there that resonates with me as well, which is when I first stumbled upon CRO, it was like magic. It was like I didn't believe this would work because nothing else worked. I'd sort of become used to that. You pay consultants and agencies fat fees, and actually nothing happens. And the board's used to that, and everyone, you report up the channels, and everyone accepts it. Yeah. And then this stuff actually worked, and it was it was like magic. Sandeep, before you get into your deck, what would you say? How have things changed?
Yeah, I think we probably all started off seeing a lot of people, perhaps with healthy skepticism, perhaps not, but certainly, starting off with that kind of skepticism side. Thankfully, with the work I've done over the years, I've seen people go from that to kind of being hungry to do things. And at the time, the only things that we really knew how to do were, button colors and shapes, and adding an icon was considered the pinnacle of what we could do back when I started. But people were really, really hungry for it. And then we've gone from that to, there's too much data and too many things we can do, and how could we even manage? And thankfully, I'm seeing now we're at a place where there's enough maturity amongst enough people that there are good processes to work out, of these 10,000 things that we could possibly go and experiment with. How do you even work out what's the right thing to do? That level of thinking certainly wasn't there 10 years ago. With all the data we could capture, certainly the volume of it has grown, tenfold, if not more, from what we used to look at. So saying, with all this data that we could capture, first there was a challenge of how to process and even make sense of it. And our tooling now is so much further forward than it used to be. So people are almost coming back to earth a little bit, I think, in terms of not being so overwhelmed by possibility. And a lot of the people that we speak to certainly are more, let's get in, let's get stuck back in. So it almost feels a little bit more like 2015 in that respect of, we think we can manage despite the scale of what we're doing being so much higher than it was, 10 years ago.
Thanks, Sandeep. A reminder for those of you in the audience live, please put your questions in the chat box, and you can ask these gentlemen with all their years of experience anything about personalization and CRO in general and program management. Sandeep, back to you.
Thank you. Yeah, let's dive in then. So this here, I think, is kind of helping us focus our energy a little bit. This is our problem. For most sites, 95% plus of the people who attend do not buy anything. And there are certainly several different approaches we can take to this. If you have terrible form UX, I've seen a lot of people spend, significant time trying to find where these points of friction are and improve them. If your navigation is awful, spending a lot of time working out how you can get people across products, into products, all these kind of things are certainly good endeavors. But beyond that, I think they kind of scratch the surface of what that 95% could do. And for us, certainly, we found personalization is the real game changer, because you're thinking about your site entirely differently. Here are a bunch of people whose needs very clearly are not being fulfilled. The more we can study about them, the more we can learn about them, and the more we can do with them, more likely you are to find entirely new ground. And kind of pools of people who really will move the needle compared to improving a form or something, which there is also a space for. It's not to say any of this research is impossible or useful, but we should be looking at all of it. What we've kind of structured the webinar on is kind of looking at three angles of this. So we have the research side of things and what you can do almost prior to really mobilizing or putting your foot into building things. We then look at the delivery side of things. So in terms of actually running experiences, what sorts of things could you be looking at? What technology can you have to hand, or should you be thinking about? And then the kind of analysis side of things as well. So looking at things both from these three perspectives, and then also from three different experience levels. So, we're targeting people who are at the very kind of basic or beginner introduction to these, people who are at a more of an intermediate level, and people who are at the kind of super advanced level as well. So hopefully there is something for everyone with the content that we go through. So beginning first with the research side of things then. So what we find quite often, especially if this is kind of your intro into personalization, one of the biggest challenges is that nobody wants to invest any time doing something they don't appreciate the value of. And proving there is a problem to be solved is almost where your focus needs to be. It's not on a specific technique or thing to do. It's almost a point to prove, which is kind of that goal of research. Longer term, you're looking for friction, you're looking for flaws or problems you can deal with. But certainly at the very beginner entry level side of things, you're just looking to make a point, which is that all of these journeys have considerable things wrong with them, and there's certainly something that you should be doing about it. But the challenge, of course, is nobody wants to invest. So the amount of time you can put into things quite often is not very high. The budget certainly is probably zero or thereabouts.
Sandeep, the one angle that I frequently come up against, that I wonder if you've been in this scenario before, and if even if you haven't, what your advice would be. I absolutely agree with your approach there, which is to start with defining the problem. What is the problem we're trying to solve? Often what I've seen, and I've seen this more often than not, is that the request comes or the direction comes from senior leadership to the team to say, we must do personalization. And that's, it's just that. There's no more detail than that. And then they've got to kind of figure out how to make sense of that and how to take that direction and turn it into a strategy. Is that something you've come up against? And how do you advise teams to deal with that?
Yeah, we've worked with companies where the directive has come down from senior leadership saying, as a company, we need to be doing one-to-one personalization. Make of that what you will, and then go make it happen. The goal for us, and the thing we kind of recommend is always to start small. If you're trying to achieve something with a data strategy that you just don't have yet, because your brain's not even wired to be thinking that way, trying to chase these kind of dreams just isn't going to happen on day one. Starting small, thinking very practically about data that you do have to play with, information you can make sense of today, what you can do with it, what you can learn from it, and then growing. This kind of curve approach: start small, go big. Start the journey, and having people buy into the idea of starting the journey is great. Being able to explain to them where you are on a very realistic, practical basis. We do not have the data we need. We cannot identify people today. Our behavioral data collection and reporting side of things, being able to mine this data is not there today. But with what we have today, here's as far as we can get. And as we learn, we will go through this journey of tagging up more, being able to analyze faster, doing more costly research that we can hopefully all agree is worth doing. And it's kind of that journey approach more than just saying, let me throw technology at you and pretend it's going to solve your problems, because that absolutely won't be the case. Yeah, hopefully that gives you what you need, Johan.
Yeah, it does.
Cool. So yeah, looking a little bit further forward then in terms of what you can do on the very basic side of things. For people who are already running experiments, which, thankfully that number is certainly growing, is exploring your experiments at a slightly deeper level than you may do. Most people look at a single metric. You look at all user targeting, perhaps split by device at most, and just look for very generalist winners. But thankfully, a lot of these tools, especially if they're connected to web analytics, but not even as a necessity, are sat on a whole big bank of data. So there's nothing stopping you from picking this up, data that already exists, and saying, right, let me spend half an hour digging into this and really trying to understand how these group of people perform. People are coming from my Instagram adverts. People are coming from these email messages that we're sending out. Are they loving it? In which case, there's absolutely something great that you've not even noticed is there. But these are things that you really should be finding. Or is something terrible happening for these people? They're not converting at all. They're absolutely hating your experiment. And what can you learn? Thankfully, the data is there for you already. Beyond this, there are kind of no-cost research options that you can take. There's a lot of UX things. I will show you one of them that you can do. And these will really help hone in on how well equipped is the site or the app or the experience for certain groups of users. So you can certainly look at that. And then, segment focused teardowns, for a group of people, how does the site perform? A lot of UX teardowns that I've seen focus on the website as a whole. How easy is the navigation? How easily can I get to the detail of the product to understand X, Y, and Z about it? But not so often with the lens of people. So these are kind of, general things that you can aim for. And one such example, which does not take particularly long to put together, is this. So this is me making a fairly simple Google search for some trainers or sneakers. We can see some UTM params in the URL, so we certainly know why the user is there. From there, we assume the user clicks onto a homepage, and this is our page of study. So how well equipped is the homepage? How relevant is it to this user based on what we know about them? They've come to a site having searched for a specific type of shoe. And one of the easiest, most visual, extremely visceral things that you can do for someone is just to put red and green boxes across the page and say, right, of everything that we see above the fold on the homepage, what is relevant and what isn't to these people? If you're searching for fairly in fashion, quite high-end trainers of a specific type, what works for you and what doesn't? And, you could take one of these. You could, go a lot further than this. But the idea at least is, to look at this and say, right, 90% of the page is not relevant to why I am a user, why I as a user am on the page. I've come for a type of shoe and almost none of this is relevant. But James, we can go considerably further than just a single design, right? You know, if we really want to make a compelling case to people.
Yeah, this is actually, before we get into this, there's always a sneaker-based theme in your presentations, which I love. So if you're into sneakers and you ever see it pop up that Sandeep's running a webinar, there will always be a sneaker theme.
I like what I like.
Yeah, absolutely. It's good. It's always, it's always that common thing across them all. It's great. It's great. So I think the thing with this, you're taking a single example here and looking at it from point of view of searching for a particular trainer, and then what you're seeing is you could class it as an irrelevant experience. Not seeing much here that's relevant to me. Bearing in mind where I've come from and what we already know about this user or yourself, Sandeep. When you kind of scale this up and pull together, kind of multiple versions of this, you can pull together a business case quite quickly to prove that, there's some really simple things that can be done, to enhance this experience for these particular users. It's the same with anything. You pull one example of something together, it's very difficult to get that buy-in. Whereas if you can prove it across kind of multiple, it's much easier. And, if we go back to the start of this, the research slide around the basics and what we're trying to achieve and what we're trying to do, the problem we're trying to solve, we're trying to get buy-in at this stage, and we're trying to do it with zero budget. And I've been there and I've had those conversations, and we're getting this kind of this top-down approach of we want to do X, Y, and Z, and we want to do one-on-one personalization, whatever it might be. Ultimately, if we can define what the outcomes that we're trying to achieve are, and then sort of scale into the research we're putting into needs to lead to this, for example, it becomes quite an easy conversation. As I say, if we look at this single example, it's great. It gives us that insight into, we don't do a great job in this scenario, but we really have to kind of scale this up and look across the board to be able to produce something which is, convincing enough in that sense.
Yeah, 100%. I think the measurement side of things as well, being able to forecast the potential is a really important aspect of this. If we take one UTM parameter in isolation, you can say, oh, it's only 0.5% of my traffic, but what's the potential here if there's 20 kinds of this shoe and that 0.5% becomes 10%, 15% of traffic? When you're putting a lot of these things together and you'll have a heavy reliance on paid traffic, being able to gauge the opportunity, I guess, James, is like the other really big side to this, right?
Yeah, this is it, and it's how you do that. And there's multiple ways to achieve that. As much as as much as you have available, or you have the data available to kind of back up, if you like. But yeah, your example there is if we know that 0.5% of people come to the site with this certain thing attached. We scale it up to work out how many come through paid search, for example. That's your opportunity, and then you kind of dig into, the next stage is to dig into what goes on beyond that. You're looking at this from a flat point of view. When we get to the next section, talk about how to then kind of extend that research into, actually what's the difference between these two data sets in a sense. So, there's the kind of the finding what you're looking for, and then there's the quantification of it for sure. Cool. I'll talk a little bit around some more of the more advanced research we can undertake. This sits quite well with me. It's something I'm quite comfortable with. So I think, when we look around the kind of getting buy-in for something, that's the first thing we're trying to solve. Once we have the buy-in, the next problem we're trying to solve is identifying things where there's kind of commonalities, if you like, or trends. And in my kind of world, in my experience, the only way to do this is to, instead of looking at things in isolation for once, we kind of want to then start to look at things comparatively. So start to correlate information that we have available to us, to try and pull together a more of a view of what the difference is between the different experiences that people are having. If we can't identify a difference, we can't implement a change that will make an experience better or worse in a sense. So we're trying to provide more relevant experiences here. Sandeep's had a really irrelevant experience on his kind of sneaker search, if you like. And one of the biggest problems we will face, which I think is always a good thing to kind of cover, is finding the information we're looking for and accessing it. So some of it's quite easy. Some of it will be available to us, very, very easily. We'll be able to access it. Won't have any problems finding it. But there'll be bits that we need that we don't know where they sit. They might sit with someone else or a different part of the business. And that's the challenge in all of this, is finding those kind of sets of data you want to pull together and correlate, above and beyond what you have available to you kind of right now. And I think, there's kind of 3 steps, kind of following the pattern of what we had before. We need to identify the information we need to know. What do we need to know, and what can that information tell us about people, about users? All the time, bearing in mind what the outcomes we're trying to achieve are. So again, going back to the first example, whereby we want to run one-on-one personalization. Well, actually, the objectives of the business are to do X, Y, and Z. We want to increase the average order value for people. We want to increase the conversion rates or click-through rates on something. What are the outcomes that we're trying to achieve? What does the data tell us about those outcomes? That's the third step. We kind of cross-reference these together. What can we learn from it? And I think this is much simpler than most people think it is. I think that sometimes it's quite intimidating to try and think about, huge sets of data, and we need to capture this, we must have that information, we must have all of this. Actually, sometimes it's right in front of us. So I've got a couple of examples that I can talk about in here, which I think are worth kind of covering off. The one that I always kind of come across, and again, with a background in digital experience from the likes of Session Cam and Glassbox, particularly around things like heat maps and kind of click maps, all those sorts of visual aids and understanding where people are looking, what they're engaging with, what they're doing. The biggest thing for me, and the biggest thing that I would always try to explain to people, is if you look at something in isolation, you can only see what's happening overall. You can't draw a conclusion from it. If you're looking at heat maps and you're looking at all the users to your site, you can see how far people scroll, you can see what they engage with, you can see what they read if you really want to dig into it. But it doesn't tell you about a difference in behavior for a different audience. So we think about audiences as people who are doing something, either achieving something or not achieving something. They have a certain experience, and it kind of then propagates the outcome that we want them to achieve. If we take the example of a heat map and we look simply at product pages and we simply compare people who purchased against people who didn't purchase, very quickly can identify what people who are purchasing or what the people who went on to buy were doing differently to the people who didn't buy. Did they read the reviews? Did they click on a sizing guide? Did they open up or copy and paste the title into somewhere else? There's some really simple things you can do, day one things you can do. So although this is classed as intermediate, the basic was the kind of no cost element. This is slightly more effort, could be slightly more cost depending on what you want to use, but fundamentally this starts to give you some real insights into what's happening. And there's plenty of examples of this. If I take that triangle in the corner, which are kind of my 3 things that I focus on, if I know that I'm trying to increase the average order value for people on the site in terms of purchases, if I look at audiences as people who used promo codes against people who didn't use promo codes, and then identify the experience that both those audiences had towards achieving the outcome, I know that actually people who added more products to the cart, whatever it might be, or used a promo code, had a higher chance of purchasing, but the average order value was lower. So therefore, I can start to bring in the conclusion that by doing X, Y, and Z to the experience of those who had a promo code, I kind of achieved a better outcome, or I improved the outcome that I was looking for. So I think the key thing here is, if you're looking at something in isolation, it's fine. If you apply the outcome you're looking to achieve to that data, and you start to compare, people who did the thing you wanted them to do and people who didn't, that's where the real insight comes. When we extend this beyond what we have available, this is where we start to push the boundaries. So taking that methodology, if you like, and taking it further afield, have to ignore the funny example on the right-hand side. I'll come to that. Probably makes no sense when you're reading it for the first time.
It's the best review I've seen in ages, I gotta say.
There's a whole page of these. There's a whole page of these. I've seen this so many times. Actually, I've seen it in a couple of different versions as well. But when we start to take the methodology of, comparing data sets, understanding an outcome, and trying to see what prompted that outcome, that's where the real value comes. But if you look at things, the obvious one at the bottom, and we'll talk about this in the delivery section, populating items that people might have purchased alongside others, recommendations, various ways of populating this. But there are some really easy ways to trip over in doing this. If we're not doing something very well in one area, it's not going to help us in another. The example on the right hand side, just because this person bought a bed didn't mean he was looking for a bed. He was looking for an ice cream. He spent $150, but he was looking for an ice cream. So you have to kind of be aware of what's the data, what are you actually looking at? What are you actually looking at, and does it answer the question of the outcome that you're trying to achieve? But the thing here is, start with the things that you have available, push and find all the data that can be available that you can correlate back with it and utilize it. It's there to utilize. We're seeing it used more and more.
Cool. Yeah, that all sounds useful. I think just pushing that topic a little bit further then, so looking at the advanced side of what you can do with research, what I've found, for better or worse, I guess, is that you're really trying to dig into people, understand, what their needs are, kind of more on a personal, psychological level. This is where I've seen the most standout pieces of research focus over the years. Challenge with this, of course, is time and effort. You can't do extremely detailed user studies with no time, no effort. And quite often, because you're trying to do things which are quite challenging, there are a lot of failures that will come alongside this before you find that success. And, I've seen people attempt one or two experiments which are focused on this kind of area, realize that they're not working, and kind of abandon ship where, it's entirely the wrong approach to take. Again, looking at kind of different things that you can focus on. One approach that I've seen is just to kind of be a bit more cerebral, I guess, with how you run experiments. Instead of looking at just generalist UX of the site as a whole, you could test much more psychological aspects of how you speak to people, what sort of things are you putting in front of them, imagery, all of these kind of much more kind of elaborate, more thought about things, and let the results kind of flesh out in the data that you capture as part of your normal experimentation program. So that's certainly kind of one side of how you could learn. I think beyond that, talking to people, there are demographics of people of this shape and size and nature that we're looking to reach out to and understand a bit more about them. There's certainly no alternative I've seen in any research people have done for actually sitting down with people, studying them, talking to them, and understanding things that you just would not be able to appreciate from quant data that you pull out of a web analytics tool, for example. And the last kind of very creative thing which I wanted to show you was this idea of almost building out really detailed personas. If you have a good idea in mind of the types of people that are coming through the site, really taking the time to think about them, what they want, what they need, what their challenges are. I've seen this result in quite transformative change for companies. So an example of this, is looking at these kind of hyper-segmented pages, which is the output that we're looking for. But it, of course, begins with this research. So we're not just taking a single persona. Absolutely not. We're looking to stack a few of these together again. And I've seen personas which are cheesy as hell over the years. So it's kind of important to focus on things which are practical for sure. It's not the goal to have something which sounds great for marketing and on a practical basis doesn't really get you anywhere. But, once you have these kind of personas, which quite often is tribal knowledge, sits within the business. We are a rail company. We have people traveling to big cities for work. They're business travelers. We have families, people traveling with children, all these kind of things. There's a whole kind of guide of thought process that you can go through. On the left side, looking more at the identification side of things. Why are they looking to do what they're doing? How can you even work out who they are? Is it based on the behavior that they exhibit, the types of searches that they're making, the things that they're looking at, devices, times, all this kind of stuff. And then on the right-hand side, it's really taking quite a stern look at them as people. What are they on the site looking to learn? What are their fears? What are their concerns? If it's me looking at high-end sneakers, for example, and they're made of suede, primary concern is that I'm going to mess it up the second I step in a puddle, which in the UK is almost a inevitability for 9 months of the year. So, it's really trying to understand, people are on the site at a certain time. What's the opportunity? What are they hoping for? What are they in need of? And then most importantly, what are they afraid of as well? And this kind of fuels an experience where you can help push and promote the things that they really care about, and then kind of support them through the process of all the things that they're not sure about or that they're quite afraid of. If you're traveling with family, making sure there is space and you can all sit together on a train or a plane, making sure there's food available if you ever need to go pick up an extra drink or something, and that these things are in the station. All these things matter considerably to that specific demographic of people. Probably not to everyone, but the more you can hone in on them as people, these things start to become crucial almost to delivering genuinely good experience to them. The same applies to ordering pizza, which is where my mind goes with most conversations that we have. What someone browsing a pizza website at 9 o'clock in the morning versus 5:30 in the afternoon, 5:30, 6 o'clock, or whenever you have dinner. I'm a 6 o'clock guy. What are they looking for, and how do their needs at those two different moments in time differ? You're probably not looking to buy pizza at 9:30, but you're thinking, "Oh, we could really do with that for dinner." You're looking for inspiration, pictures of cheese pulls, all these kind of things to get yourself in the mood to really say, yes, this is what I want to do, instead of ordering Chinese food or something else. But at 5:30, 6 o'clock, it's more practical, it's more focused. You're looking at actually getting your orders in, getting everyone's requirements together. So yeah, kind of really taking the time to think about people, where they are at certain different times of the day, and what could be going on inside their head. It is really important to crafting an experience. This one size fits all approach to websites is not going to get that 95% number down that we mentioned at the start. And this is just one example of what you can look to see. So based on the study that we did and, kind of series of experimentation afterwards, we're not talking about, 2, 3, 4% uplifts. That's taken us 2 or 4 weeks to kind of detect. In certain cases, we're looking at, for this segment of people, we've got half of them to convert to purchase more often than they used to, because we've got into their heads, and then we've gone and crafted an experience which really works for them. So, don't assume that these are kind of small ways to nudge conversion rates. Going from 1% to 1.1% to give yourself a 10% uplift. It's not necessarily that. You can do really transformative things with this. Hopefully that, gives you a fair bit on the research side of things. So next thing that we wanted to cover was delivery.
Sandeep, there's a, sorry to interrupt. There's a question. I think I get it. And by the way, a reminder, if you have questions for Sandeep or James, please pop them in the chat. Where do you find the best ideas? I think I understand the question. I wouldn't know how I'd answer that. But is there a way you could attempt to say, what I'm reading between the lines here is that we've tried a lot of things in personalization, and we haven't always got the number of winners that we hoped we would get. Where do you find the best ideas come from? How would you attack that?
I think there's almost different ways of thinking about the problem when it comes to ideation. One is looking at the art of the possible, and conversations with good development teams, people who've seen and are on the forefront of tech, for better or worse. And I'm sure a lot of people have strong opinions about this, but even talking to tech vendors and saying, look, what are the more creative things that you're up to? might fuel some ideas for data that you're sat on and you're not really sure what to do with it. But I think more on the research side of things, the side that we've just covered, talking to people to really understand what the problem is and, who is at the forefront of dealing with people's problems. That would be, your call centers, your support teams, certainly looking at reviews. People with the strongest opinions, better or worse, are probably the ones leaving reviews. I'm sure you would find more reviews for 1 and 5 stars than you would for 3. So kind of honing in on these things with a mentality of, I'm here to find problems or opportunities, things that people have absolutely loved that we just do not have an appreciation for, and we need to do a better job of communicating, or things that people are really, really struggling with that internally we've not recognized, or the information sat in a silo in a team that, web doesn't talk to support. And if we go over there and, really understand, we're being hammered with calls all day where people are trying to understand X, Y, and Z. These things, the more you learn from them, that's for me at least where the inspiration comes from. But yeah, James, I don't know if you have anything further on, where do you look for ideas and inspiration and find things that I guess will make a dent, to Johan's point.
I think mine might be more controversial. Competitors is a simple one. What are other people doing? Not necessarily because it works, it might not work. But go and see what other people are doing. It's a really easy place to get some inspiration from. Speak to people. I've always found, so we've had all this data about how people use different sites. And one of the most beneficial ways to understand if a site works the way you want it to is to sit and watch someone use it, to sit and follow someone as they try and do something on your website, or you give them a task to achieve, that whole kind of, user level research, but just watch that experience. But also, like, we know in our heart of hearts what the experience we're looking for is when we come to a website. If I go to a brick and mortar clothes shop and they welcome me back, I feel really happy they've welcomed me back. If I go to the doctors and they welcome me back, I'm not going to feel as chuffed about it, right? You know the experience that you want to have on different sites that serve different things, and if you bring those ideas to the table, how do they materialize in a way that they contribute to what we're trying to achieve? Some of those ideas will contribute, some won't contribute, and it goes back to the whole effort versus reward thing. How much effort will this take, and what's the reward? Effort gets a 5 out of 10, but reward gets a 10 out of 10, whatever it might be. Stack all the ideas together, and score them all, and then say, right, we'll start from here and work backwards. And if your data supports those, absolutely great. It's a great place to start. So controversial, but there's options, definitely.
I'm certainly with you on looking over someone's shoulder. The amount of time I've tried to get mum to send a WhatsApp voice note or something, I'm like, oh, it's just this button over here, and then you just sit and watch it be an absolute car crash, and you realize how unintuitive some of the UIs that we take for granted, because kind of built on this idea of this button is to send a message, or just hold it down and don't let go of it because that will send the message. But these are things that quite often you only really get an appreciation for when you're looking at someone and it's an absolute wreck, and you've got to start furiously scribbling down all the things that you realize are not as obvious as you really gave them an appreciation for.
Exactly.
Yeah, cool. Hopefully that answers the question. So looking further forward then, so the second half of things, or second side of things at least, is looking at delivery, and what we can do to deliver experiences. The way we tend to focus on things is almost a deviation from traditional thinking. So I'm sure a lot of people have seen some flavor of this, a maturity curve, put out to kind of say, hey, these are things that you're probably looking at today, and if you start doing X, Y, and Z, we will call you more mature, which for us almost that doesn't quite make sense. I've seen a lot of people attempt sophisticated things in a not very well thought out way. So doing clever things doesn't necessarily make you mature in that sense. And our way of thinking is almost this instead, which is a data maturity curve. And and saying, the more comfortable you are collecting and engineering data, the further along you are in this kind of sense of maturity. Because at the most basic end of things are not necessarily difficult, but you will not gain a great deal. But the people who are running genuinely very sophisticated programs are the ones who are engineering considerable amounts of data. And yeah, just kind of grouping some of these bits together, looking at things like collection and tagging on the extremely basic side of things, collaboration in the middle. So looking not just at what a single user is doing in isolation, but what people as a whole are doing. And then on the kind of much more advanced side of things, it's this kind of deep learning, modeling, prediction side of things. And then unnecessary animation where I've left morph in for no reason.
Why not? Hey, why not? Yeah, I'll take this one around the delivery of sort of a basic experience, because it follows on quite nicely from your kind of sneaker example. Again, referring back to this, is making something relevant, is making something a relevant experience from nothing. And just because something doesn't shout hello James or hello Sandeep doesn't mean it's not personalization as such. If we look at this example here, here's an Instagram ad. If I click through to the website as it is today, the item that person is wearing, which I'm convinced is Dynamo, but I'm happy to be proven otherwise, that the item that he's wearing in that picture appears nowhere on the page I'm landing on. So I'm clicking through for that reason. I've now got to search for the thing I'm looking for. And I had this theory that we always used to use when we say that people will land on a website with a certain amount of perseverance, and every time they come across something which annoys them, some perseverance will be taken out of that bag. They have to pay for that. Some coins will be lost. Some perseverance will go. And you only have a certain amount of that perseverance before people leave. There's always someone else who will sell the product you're selling in the majority of the cases. And people won't persevere with it. So I'm landing here and I'm not seeing what I want to see. I'm out of here. I'll find something else. And it's quite simple. Either we add that product or that item onto the homepage, you can see in this example, or even better, we put it in a product carousel where that user can add it straight to their basket. Make it as simple as possible for them to get from the thing they've seen that spiked their interest. Sandeep talked about this earlier. What makes them excited? What's the thing that drives them? What are they thinking? They're excited because they've seen something they want to buy. They've gone through to the site and they can't find it anywhere. Put it in front of them. Make that journey as short as possible. Just to say, it doesn't shout your name, doesn't mean it's not personalizing that experience. So in its most basic form, easy things to go at. Very, very easy things to go at.
Yeah, exactly. These are things I think most people could build in any WYSIWYG tool, to the credit of every vendor. Probably in the space of 3 to 5 minutes. I can't see this taking much longer. But if you look at the experience the user has when clicking through that initial graphic of that Instagram ad to where they end up, where they see the same imagery, so they say, "Cool, I'm definitely at the right place, and I'm not fat fingered and ended up somewhere else." I can see the product as well. So one click and I'm into that purchase process. If you're not sending users to your PDPs and you are sending them to what could be a generic page, the smallest amount of personalization suddenly makes that whole continuity of interest, so much more obvious. And yeah, we've seen this work countless times.
You've raised another good point, actually, one that I meant to cover, thinking about it, about that relevancy piece, just that confidence piece of landing somewhere and seeing something which is, something which you're familiar with, having clicked through from it. And we talk about this as well, don't we, with, email campaigns and, continuity of messaging from an email campaign to them landing on the site, anywhere where you're, giving information to someone, showing them something, if that can be continued in their experience on the site itself, it just instills that confidence from first landing. So yeah, I've got to add that. It's good point.
Cool. Just going to rattle through a few of these then. So looking at the kind of more intermediate side of things, recommendations when it comes to this kind of engineering product feeds, scanning through data, doing some collaboration across what users are doing, and making sense of that. Product recommendations are certainly the most obvious example of where that takes place. The key thing for us when people look at this, I've seen a lot of people who will turn recommendations on. Some of them come out of the box with your CMS, for example, and you'll say, we're already doing recommendations, it's fine. It's like, no, where are you doing them? What's driving the recommendations? How relevant are they to the person at that moment in time based on what they need? If it's halfway down the PDP, pre-add to bag, are people still in the exploration and discovery phase, in which case similar products are probably a lot more wired to what they're in need of in that moment? Is it post add to bag and they're buying a tap and they could do with some sealant and some rubber fittings, and I'm sure a lot of other things that people who've actually ever built a bathroom are aware of. But kind of putting yourself in the mindset, you can put recommendations anywhere. You could swap out banners on a homepage, and that is a recommendation, content instead of product, but it's still a recommendation. But what is the right thing to show at every single interaction in the user journey? It's not just a carousel on a PDP. You should be thinking a lot more holistically about the entire journey a user has and all of the irrelevant things that you're presenting them with along that journey. And I'm sure a lot of people see value in this, and it's kind of understood, but just to make sure it's clear, all manner of recommendations we have seen generate quite sizable revenue uplifts for people. So this is definitely something, if you're paying no attention to and it's just a carousel that's been switched on and you think you're done, it's definitely worth addressing and really honing in on. And then just on the kind of a lot more advanced side of delivery, there's a few really interesting things I'm seeing emerging, especially recently. Propensity scoring, for one, looking at the likelihood that people will or won't do something that you're interested in. Perhaps it's, likelihood to purchase, and when it's high, go ahead and leave them alone. When it looks quite low, there's probably some intervention that's needed if, certainly if the journey doesn't look like it's doing the job it needs to do. Churn on the other side of things, it's people who are buying or people who are definitely going to churn pretty soon. So looking at that side of things is one. I've then also seen people treat their websites like an email campaign or a series of them. So looking at that kind of orchestration side of things and saying, when people come to my site as a new user, this is the kind of experience that we want them to have. But on that second load, that repeat purchase, once we've learned X, Y, and Z about the categories or the brands or the price ranges that they're interacting with, how is that experience supposed to evolve when they leave and they come back? How is that experience supposed to evolve? And thinking about it almost from that kind of traditional, marketing automation, orchestration side of things, I've seen work really well. But on the final side is looking at what I almost consider, it's my own made-up term, really. I don't know if it's correct or not, but contextual MVTs. So taking MVTs where you have a whole plethora of combinations of content that you could get in front of people, and traditional MVTs would look for a single winner. Contextual MVTs takes in both what you know about someone. Are they a loyalty type customer? What categories have they been browsing? What do you know about them? You then have this big MVT that sits in the middle. So here's a whole kind of realm of content that you could be serving people, different things about it, experimenting with it, and then looking at a range of goals. And instead of looking for that single winner, you're looking for, what will probably start with a couple of, sub-segment winners, and hopefully will evolve into tens, thousands of sub-segment winners, where you're saying, for these people in this moment, when you catch them at the right time, this is definitely the treatment they need as part of their experience. So there is a kind of very advanced side to things, which I appreciate a lot of people, are not at yet. But certainly in terms of things that you could aim for, having a system where you can load it up with content, leave it alone, and it will work out for you when is the right time to show this paywall on my content news, magazine website, for example. These things are incredibly valuable to people. And then last but not least, looking at analysis, which we will get through quickly. Kind of taking the middle ground to begin with. You can look at both behavior and identity as our kind of two categories of attributes to consider. And what you're looking for is difference in progress between these groups of people. It could be positive. Again, these things don't need to be negative. These people are really struggling. No, like some of the best research you can do is to find people who absolutely love what you're doing and are having kind of, until then, not understood levels of success with your journey, because at least it gives you something to point to, and you can say, why are these people having such a great time? So what you probably get out of it is something like this. We've done these studies in the past looking at insurers, for example, looking at things like, how do men versus women get through that journey? Something that you can deduce from the fields that people are filling out. Turns out men had a real difficult time when that credit card page opened up. Or looking at things like age ranges and any demographic-based data, type of properties they're in, insurance journeys especially, has so much data that you're sat on. But you could look at these age ranges and, stereotypically or otherwise, the older people were, the more that small print arrived, and the more they're struggling. So it's, being able to point to these problems as part of analysis that you're doing is very helpful. And, to go one step more basic than this, it's kind of the appreciation that all these attributes probably aren't to hand. And it's saying, right, what is the entry to doing this type of analysis and finding these kind of problems that you can get to? But on the more advanced side of things, James, there's, how far do you go? How many attributes deep can you scan? These are kinds of things that people are talking about, right?
Yeah, I think so. In its simplest form, you mentioned there, the example we have in front of us looks at a small piece of demographical data, age and sex of whoever's using the product or using the journey we're on. In its most basic form, you don't need that information. You can do it without. You can see how people are flowing through a particular journey or path to site. And this being the middle ground, when you start to think about how much demographic information you have, and as you've just mentioned, how much data you could have, considering that there could be stacks of information you have from a journey where you've collected it, how much time do you dedicate to investigating all of those? Where does it become a point where, as a person, I can't do this? I need a machine to do this for me. I just can't manage the information. So I think its basic level is here. The intermediate level is the thing that we would always strive people to push them to try and do. But in terms of the advanced level of analysis, it's something it has to take some consideration as to how you're going to achieve that.
I do, before we're out of time, I do want to squeeze in Ray's question, because I think it's another common one. How do you know if you have enough data? Ray says accurate data, but how do you know if you have enough data to start doing personalization?
I find experimentation to be a very good marker of this, and something people have kind of wired their brains towards. You could say, for example, to achieve stat sig on a given metric, we need this much data coming through. And, it's not necessarily at 99% confidence, this is what we're striving for with personalization, but at least wiring your brain towards this idea of probability and saying, perhaps we're looking for 85% confidence in what we're seeing. But at least this idea of volume and strength of change kind of produces a certain output that you can reliably point your finger at. And going way back to something that we spoke about at the beginning, it's almost a potential opportunity, being able to make sense of this. So, it's not so much saying how many people are there. If you're selling Bugattis, being able to personalize to an audience of 20, I'm sure will go a long way if you manage to get them all to buy. But but it's looking at the size of the opportunity more than anything else. And if the effort is worth the carrot at the end of it, those are at least the two sides of it I would consider.
Any last thoughts from you, James? What have we not covered that you think we should get out of the way?
Well, how long have we got? We haven't got long enough. I could talk all day. I think the closing thing for me, and the thing that I always stress, and I realize we're right at the top, so I'll make this really quick as opposed to rabbiting. If you want to do it, you can do it with what you have available. If you consider what you have available to you, personalization is achievable. It's achievable with a very small amount of time, effort, and data. Going back to that question from Ray, you don't need huge amounts of stuff to do this. There are stuff that you could go away and do this afternoon. We promised there'd be actionable things you could do. There are things you can do. We're given those examples within here. Create milestones which are achievable, get the right buy-in from the right people, and push towards the goals that everyone is working towards. Personalization will be quite a straightforward thing for you. It's not as daunting as you think it should be.
On that note, that's a good way to leave it. Thanks, James, for that. Thanks, Sandeep. Thanks, everyone, for joining. If you want to get in touch with Sandeep and James, look them up on LinkedIn. Their contact details should be associated with this video when you watch the replay. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.